I'm Matti, and as we just recently spoke, I'm currently working in the IT University of Copenhagen, Center of Computer Game Research, and I'm officially affiliated to University of Turku. I'm there in Finnish, that would be leikki- ja pelitutkimuksen dosentti. In English, I guess no one really knows what that is. Maybe title of a docent, at least here in Jyväskylä, Helsinki. And some people call this the adjunct professor in play and games, probably the first one in the world. So I'm pretty happy with this position that I recently acquired. So we're going to be talking about over the next 20 minutes or so about something called video game addiction, so-called video game addiction. And before going there, let's just spend a minute on what this thing that I've been working with so far is about in general. Games research, a relatively new field in sciences. Some people also call it game studies, ludology, also one word that means the same thing. Study of play games, video games. Also, if you want to play sure, just put them all there. As long as you're not using the term game theory, which is obviously a part of mathematics. Von Neumann and Morgenstern and others established it ages ago. But video game research, game studies, ludology, this thing, around 2001, the first official academic journal on games was established in 2003, Digital Games Research Association. So we're talking about 15 years old field. And so we have a lot of methodologies. So it's what we are doing is we're interested in a specific cultural object, playing games, and things related to that. So it's not uncommon for a single researcher or many researchers to use different methods over their careers. You can do like philosophical or critical theory. You can do social science methods, ethnography, quantitative methods, even laboratory experiments, computer sciences. All these things, design research, are kind of merged in this one field. And depending on what we're currently working on, we choose the methods. So that's something that is not very common, I would say, in other scientific fields. Now, and when it comes to this specific case of addiction and video game addiction, it's interesting because really few people in this field know psychology. Very few are competent in psychological theories, and that's probably the reason why about 95% of the research in video game addiction and related concepts has been done elsewhere. So it's like psychology journals, like other journals have been doing that work, and that's very problematic for many reasons that I will show you in the following. So let's first start by going through a number of headlines that maybe I'm sure some of you have noticed this. 2 fanatic World of Warcraft gamers have died because of WoW. That was 2005. Girls starved to death while parents raised virtual child in online game. This happened in South Korea, 2010, if I remember right. Sorry mother jailed for 25 years for allowing her daughter to starve to death while she played an online video game. The same thing happened a year later in the US. Teenager collapses and dies after playing online computer game for 40 hours straight. 2012, a California couple in prison for neglecting children while playing World of Warcraft. Again, World of Warcraft. 2014, so they jailed apparently some kids in a van for 3 years. And finally, man dies in Taiwan after a 3-day online gaming binge. This is quite recent, 2015. So what is this stuff? Is it like poison? You just touch these video games and computer games, and then you just end up dying or killing other people. Nick Yee, a pretty celebrated scholar, in his early study on these kinds of virtual environments, nearly half of the respondents considered themselves to be addicted to MMORPGs. So what does this addiction mean? What does it mean when someone says they're addicted, or what does it mean to be addicted to video games? And this is a very controversial topic and an interesting topic as well for researchers. The problem with the research so far is that it's been done outside this field. So usually the people who have done this research have never played any games themselves, and that's also leading to problems that we will soon tackle. First academic, how would I put it? Academic mentioning of this concept, video game addiction, comes from 1983. Soper and Miller, they published, I think the journal was called School Counselor, so it's an educational studies journal. They published a report according to which a student sought help with what he described as his addiction involving the unlikely names of Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde. Anyone know? What's the game? Yeah? No. Pac-Man, of course. 1983. So this was not a peer-reviewed study. It was just a report sent to this academic journal. But 30 years later, this is what's currently going on, and very interesting. So APA, American Psychiatric Association, publishes their 5th edition of DSM, so Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's 2013, which is not far from here. That's like 4 years ago. And in this one, for the first time in history, we see gambling moved from the impulse control group to addictive disorders group, which means that the problem is no more in the person who has this impulse control problem. So it's not about the patient or the subject themselves, but there's something more serious. There's addiction related, which is more like it's more like a political move. So it's the gambling machine that is seriously involved in the system. So we have a substance that is a significant component in this disorder. And at the same time, also, internet gaming disorder, for the first time in history, is added also into the same addictive disorders category, but only in section 3, which means that it's not official yet, but it's pending further research, and it will be added in the next edition unless research shows otherwise. So the first time in history we have substances which are not substances, but they're behaviors, so-called behavioral addictions, officially classified in this book as addictions. And obviously, while the concept, the term internet gaming disorder, they use that term, it also implies like everything you can play pretty much digitally. So it doesn't have anything to do with internet. It's pretty much games like this, and you can get now officially addicted to them. So what does it mean to be addicted? We don't have time to go through them all, but let's just list them here. This is from the same DSM-5. This is how you officially diagnose someone with this internet gaming disorder. Let's take a look at the first one. For instance, preoccupation with internet games. The individual thinks about previous gaming activity or anticipates playing the next game. Like, this is how, if you score 5 out of 9, then you're addicted. Then you're addict. If you think about any activity that you like, just any, like reading, watching films. Do you think about that film or that book after you read it, or do you think about before you start doing that, or like whatever is your favorite activity? Of course, you think about this stuff before and after. That's like everyone, I'm sure, would have checked the first condition. Let's take the second criterion. Withdrawal symptoms when internet gaming is taken away. So think about a child playing Angry Birds. If you get sad, for instance, or anxious or irritated by this fact that someone takes the game away from you, then you check the second criteria, and so on and so on. So most of these ways of measuring this internet gaming addiction are just ridiculous in many ways. There are a couple of them are interesting, but most of them are not very good. So from another perspective, we can this is Howard Schaffer and his colleagues' theory, a model. Syndrome model for addiction. I think this is a much more interesting way of looking at the situation. So in order for someone to be diagnosed, like in order to understand what happens to those who have this so-called addiction, we need to take into consideration a lot of other things as well. So basically, we can talk about neurobiological elements like genetic risk factors. There's also psychosocial elements like the different environment where people live and interact with other people. That is like together these components are able to generate this vulnerability. Of course, and then there's the object or activity of addiction. So we can think about that as well. Together, these end up into this so-called addiction syndrome, and only at the stage when we start to have these adverse consequences, it becomes serious. And when it comes to video game addiction or internet gaming disorder, of course the problem is that we don't really what are the actual adverse consequences that most people get from we had 9 people in those headlines, 9 people in the world. We have 1.5 billion people playing these games, and we have 9 people who ended up killing someone or dying themselves for reasons we don't really know. But what are the actual adverse consequences that gaming generates? So the research, well, yeah, that's a funny picture. Let's just skip it. The actual research that supports these adverse consequences model is pretty much here. It was made by my colleague in Copenhagen, Rune Nilsson. And let's take a look at them. Epileptic seizures, auditory hallucinations, enuresis, encopresis, obesity, wrist pain, neck pain, tenosynovitis, knee tendinitis, split disc, calluses, sore tendons, and numbness of fingers, repetitive strain injuries. Most of this list is actually not peer-reviewed. It gets constantly cited, but it's just letters to the editor that, I experienced this when I was playing. Or then it's just simply bad research. I need to cite you, I think it was page 55 from his dissertation. I doubt that the authors realize that they're citing a letter of a 9-year-old who suffered a blister on a thumb when they claim that there are documented association between video games and musculoskeletal disorders. So this 9-year-old kid has more references than all my papers together. It's like, this is the stuff that gets cited in these video game addiction scholars in the field of psychology. So it's like, that's the current situation. Now, what I'm really interested in, and I'm writing a book, it should be finished this summer, is phenomena called this, and I think this is where things get actually interesting. So it's esports. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, at least. And the experience, how can we actually distinguish play behavior in which people are playing for a purpose and being addicted? I think that's one of the most interesting, fascinating kind of conflict points that hasn't been taken into consideration. So esports, that's pretty much the most popular time-consuming activity that is currently thriving in the video game fields. And the difference is here, basically this is a ranked distribution of the most popular esports game, League of Legends at the moment. There's 103 million monthly active players. And the difference, when you compare this to usual gaming, is that you're obviously trying to become better. So you're trying to move forward. It's like any sport, some of you have probably done some sports. How do you actually play a sport? Well, you don't just regularly, do stuff, but if you're taking your sport seriously, you're trying to become better in one way or another. And you don't even have to take it serious. You just pretty much, it's about self-improvement. And now the interesting thing is that you have to spend a lot of time, obviously, in order to reach the self-improvement state. And if you go to this site, which measures how much time people actually spend, an average player, according to this site, has spent 1,159 hours. So that's a lot of hours, obviously, for any player to spend on actual play. Of course, you can triple that if you want to take into account the stuff that they do for their activity beyond that play behavior, but that's a lot of hours. But it's of course it's very natural that people spend those amounts of hours if they're actually trying to improve. Erikson's classic studies from the 90s, also late 80s, and I think he's recently still working on the same topic, actually moving to video game research as well, Anders Eriksson. Expertise in anything takes about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So it's like if you want to make it, you need to spend these hours. And how can we distinguish between someone who's actually trying to make it in this gaming scene, or just enjoy the activity of improving oneself, and being an addict? That's a very fascinating, instance of this phenomena. We did a study with a colleague last year, Tuomas Kari, and we found that about 5.5 hours is spent on those who actually play these games in a striving mode, so that they just want to move forward, and that's pretty much. They also spend probably double that time if we just count all that activity that they spent around the game. That's just that's the deliberate practice time, which is the time they seriously try to practice. So it's a lot of hours. If you do that for 5 years in a row, you will reach 10,000, and then you will have a chance. So it's obvious that those people who want to do it, they just need to spend that amount, and that's of course problematic in many ways as well. But let's take a look at, for instance, gambling research studies. This is Natasha Schul's, one of Natasha Schul's interviewees. It's a pretty famous drawing drawn by one gambling addict, which describes her experience of how does it feel to be a gambling addict. So they talk about the zone. So when you're addicted to gambling, it's like this zone, a stasis state where nothing changes. You're just surrounded by things that are your life, but what you actually think about is this, gambling machine and nothing else but the gambling machine, and you just want to be in the zone. So it's a really stable stasis state where you just focus on this one activity that doesn't really change. So they don't care about the money, they don't pay for the wins. Whenever they get money, they just waste the money in order to extend their zone experiences. So that's pretty much their life. But when it comes to, like, if we compare it to these people, these millions, tens of millions of people who actually play these esports games, and they're the most central addict group at the moment in this video game addiction concept. It's more like a channel, I would say. That's pretty much my argument, theoretical argument. They're playing in a channel which is phenomenologically an entirely different kind of way. They're trying to move forward, not stay in this stable state of zone, but rather moving forward. And that's I think my 20 minutes is pretty much off. Hopefully we can continue with the questions after another presentation. Thanks.